Right. Kindred by Octavia Butler. I believe it was published, or I believe it was written in 1979. Feel free to correct me on that if I'm mistaken. Novel, science fiction novel by Octavia Butler. Although science fiction perhaps is not really appropriate here, but that's perhaps it's not really. It's more lit crit. It's more lit fic. It's more literary fiction than it is a science fiction novel. In fact, it's not. So let me just lay it out. The non-spoiler summation of the book is that it's a time travel novel. A young, I believe in her 20s, relatively recently married African-American woman is inexplicably transported, suddenly and inextricably transported to the antebellum South, where, of course, slavery is very much practiced. It very much is the order of the day, the institution. And so she is forced to survive. She finds herself trapped in the past, in the antebellum South, in the United States of America, in Maryland, but not in California, and is forced to attempt to survive there. That is the simple premise, or if you want to say it's the initial thought experiment that is the book. And it's an excellent idea. Before I get into spoilers and saying anything deeper, it's an excellent book. I read it it's quite long, and I read it in about a day. I burned right through it. It's quite exciting. It's genuinely harrowing. The heroine, the woman, Dana, the African-American woman, incredibly resourceful, incredibly determined, very likable. She's forced to rely on her wits. She faces incredibly tough odds. The time itself, there are all sorts of threats. She's a black person. Slavery is present, and it's a dangerous time. It's a dangerous time period. It's a dangerous time anyway. Let me say, and this is for me incredibly high praise. It really reminds me very much of adventure novels, some of my favorite adventure novels. I shouldn't even say reminds me of, it very much is. I think you can read this book different ways. The way I read it was as an adventure story, as an adventure novel, and it's excellent. I feel like it reminds me of reading Robert Louis Stevenson, Jack London, authors like that. It's just an excellent adventure story. And I think in some ways, that's the highest praise I can give it. Very, very well done. Principally because the odds, the difficulties that the heroine encounters, that she has to overcome, the difficulties that she has to deal with, it's incredibly tough. And she is in very real danger very often. So that's the initial, I think, almost no spoilers, summation and recommendation. Yeah, I highly recommend it. Great adventure novel, excellent read. All right. Moving on, getting into spoilers territory. So what you come to discover in the course of the novel is that Dana is transported back to the antebellum South, and she goes back and forth, right? She's transported back to the antebellum South, and then she comes forward, and then she returns to her own time. Time moves differently. In the present, I think the entire novel might take place in the present in 8 days. She, for some stretches, is there for years, certainly for a very long time. And her husband, who also plays a major part in the book, spends many years in the antebellum South. He's transported to the past with her on occasion, and he's stranded there. So that in itself is pretty fascinating, that the action of the novel, on the one hand, takes place over 8 days in the present, and in the past, it takes place over years. Years, decades, because Dana, what Dana comes to discover, what you discover with her, is that she's transported to the past. And initially, when she's transported into the past, a young boy named Rufus, his life is in danger, and she saves him. Someone points a gun at her, she's threatened, and she returns to the present. It's a very brief trip. It's a very brief time that she spends in the past, at least initially. Shortly thereafter, in the present, I think maybe within the same day, in the present, she's summoned back to the past. She meets the same boy again. He's quite a bit older, maybe he's 12 or something now, but he is in danger once again. Initially, he's in danger of drowning the first time she's transported to the past. The second time, he's in danger from a fire, which he set, and she manages to save him. And again, she returns to the present. When she's panicked enough, when she's, the mechanism or the mechanic, the way it works is that she's transported to the past when it's necessary to save Rufus, when it's necessary to save this boy, and she's returned to the present when she is in tremendous fear, when she's in great danger herself. Right? So there's an interesting balance. She's summoned to the past to save him, and she's removed from the past, perhaps to save herself, perhaps so that she'll be saved. I would have to think about that more, but it's certainly an interesting dynamic. Predictably, though, fascinatingly, and this is not particularly surprising, but it's an excellent feature of the novel. She comes to discover that Rufus is her ancestor, I suppose. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but a great grandfather. One of Rufus's daughters. Rufus will father a daughter with a slave, a black woman, and that woman will be a grandmother, a great grandmother, I suppose, for Dana. So Dana, on the one hand, she's summoned to the past to save Rufus's life, and she's also, and you're never told, but obviously the suspicion is that, look, if he dies, she won't exist, right? The chain of births, the actions that will have to take place for her to exist in the present day will not come to pass if he dies, and saving him therefore becomes a mission, saving herself, I suppose you could say. Although it's not entirely clear if that's the case. I should note that Dana very much acts out of, human kindness. She acts to save this person's life. The relationship grows increasingly complicated over the years. And not surprising, Rufus is the son of a slave owner. There's a plantation or a farm, and it's, I suppose the realism is, one thing to say is perhaps the realism is admirable. The slave owning family is pretty simple. It's pretty, they're pretty crude. They're not, they're sharper knives in the drawer. I mean, they have a kind of, they exhibit a kind of vicious animal cunning oftentimes. They're mean, they're petty, they're definitely concerned with money. They're not particularly appealing, and yeah, I mean, there's nothing. It definitely illustrates that a system of enslavement that is based on race, is based on skin color. It's certainly not a meritocracy. There's nothing about Rufus's family. They're not deserving. They don't really merit the power, the influence, whatever that they have, not only because it's fundamentally unjust. Slavery is, of course, a fundamentally unjust and immoral institution. They're not particularly impressive. They're quite short-sighted. They're quite simplistic in a lot of ways, and this is all the more sad, or this is all the more tragic, because as you watch Rufus, as Dana returns to the past and returns to the present, but then has to go back to save Rufus on several occasions, you see Rufus become increasingly corrupted, increasingly fall prey to all the kind of terrible behavior that you would expect. One thing that I think comes across very clearly in the novel, slavery, it's definitely, there's nothing surprising about this, it's a corrupting institution. It has very much a corrupting influence on the slave owners. It twists them, it corrodes them, it makes them crooked, dislikable, rather hideous things. I mean, in so many ways. Rufus at times wants to be a good person, and Rufus at times wants to do the right thing. But Rufus can't always indulge himself. He holds power over others when he takes his father's place, when he becomes the owner of the plantation, the farm, the owner of the slaves. He can abuse that power. When he feels like it, he can act on whims, and that power will be abused. He and Dana have a rather fascinating relationship. In many ways, she's a positive influence on him, but it's a lost cause. And as it goes on, he becomes increasingly corrupted. He becomes increasingly it's quite sad, right? You see this young boy at the beginning of the novel, all that promise of youth, and it's sad to see what it turns into. I'm not going to say too much about the plot other than what I've said already. Again, let me just emphasize, I think there are many ways that this book could be read. I think it would reward more than one reading. I'm certainly going to read it again. I thought it was excellent. I'm going to read more books by Octavia Butler. I'll probably read everything that I can find. I can't. It's very good. Right? It's really worth checking out. This could be read in many ways. This could be read on many levels. I think I'll try and read it again in an attempt to assess more of the moral arguments, in an attempt to assess more of the moral conundrums and the difficulties that the characters face. I mean, one of the terrible things for Dana is that she's a good person, and she doesn't want to see Rufus hurt, killed. He's a terrible person. He's engaged in a terrible institution, but she feels compelled to save him. She feels she's a human being, right? She's a noble, she's a good person. She's a fundamentally good person. But saving Rufus means keeping Rufus alive, and Rufus is doing horrible things to the slaves, to the other slaves, and I should emphasize, Dana herself is forced to live as a slave, is forced to try and survive as a slave in the antebellum South. I do want to read it again, certainly at least one more time. I'd probably read it more than that, and I'd like to read it more with an eye to considering the moral difficulties that Dana finds herself in. I mean, I just touched on the one there. Like, I have to save this guy because it's the right thing to do, and I have to save this guy because maybe I won't be born if I don't keep this guy alive. But he's a horrible person, and he's doing horrible things, and saving him means he will continue to be able to do some of those horrible things. As I say, she does have something of an ameliorating influence. She does have something of a positive influence on Rufus, although it's quite sad. It's not really going to do that much good. And you can see how weak, I think, in a system like slavery, positive moral influences would be, how ineffectual they could be. There are economic considerations that argue against acting morally, doing the right thing, and it's an incredibly cruel, oppressive system. It's fundamentally evil. It's fundamentally twisted. And positive moral influences are not going to be, not going to be tremendously effective in such a situation. This initial reading, this first reading, I mainly read it as an adventure novel, and as I said, it's just excellent. Makes me think in a lot of ways of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Jonathan Swift, Robert Louis Stevenson, Jack London, Paul Bowles, all the things I like about authors like that. I very much would put Butler in that camp. It's a great adventure novel. And again, I emphasize, because the odds she faces are so tough. The situations she faces are so difficult. In the antebellum South, she is an African-American woman. She's physically not as strong as a lot of the white men, the slave owners that she confronts. She is often in danger. Her situation is incredibly complicated. And yeah, she's a dogged, resourceful, very intelligent, very likable protagonist. I really can't say enough about that. I will also add that her husband, she's married to a white man, and when he's transported back in the past, they're able to use that. He pretends to be her owner, and this helps with certain situations. The husband is also they're a good team. The husband is also quite a good protagonist, resourceful, determined, loyal. It's very nice. They're a good team. They are a good couple. It is also, I should say, in addition to being an excellent adventure novel, it's also a rather charming love story between the two of them. That's not as prominent, but there's a lot to like. There's a great deal. Their relationship is very rich, and the novel is definitely improved by it. All right. So Kindred, I think it would be hard to recommend it enough. Excellent adventure story. I really tremendously enjoyed it. As I said, I think maybe it's 300, 400 pages. I'm not even sure. I just burned through it in one day because I had to find out what happened. I had to find out how it ends. The writing is excellent. The pacing, I think, really quite exceptional. Yeah, highly recommended. I certainly will read the rest of. I certainly will read the other things. I'll certainly read her other works, no doubt. All right, so let me know what you think. If I got anything wrong, by all means, correct me. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, ideas about how to read the novel in a different way, I'm sure there's tons of. It's a rich field. There's a lot that could be discussed from this novel. There's a lot that could be that you could dig into. I've barely touched on it, and I understand that, but that's the purpose here. So I'd certainly be interested to hear people's thoughts, questions, ideas about the novel, recommendations for what to read next by Butler, because I definitely am. It's definitely on the to-read list now, for sure. All right, yeah, so that's it. All right, catch you later.